So, welcome to this episode of the podcast. I'm joined by Julian Berridge from Cambridge Marketing College. And Julian has a very, very interesting role that is going to hopefully fascinate you in terms of a slightly different perspective on communications and supporting the various people who come through the journey with Cambridge Marketing College. And there is a relevance here for all of us because the topic that we are going to be discussing at some point in this conversation, I'm sure we're going to head there, is embracing dyslexia. Now, this is a very pertinent topic for each and every one of us, even if we haven't been possibly even diagnosed or we've identified that there might be something about the way that we're made or our innate preferences that maybe lead us to thinking that maybe dyslexia or dyspraxia is kind of on our radar or should be. That doesn't matter. That is not what we're here to talk about. What we're here to talk about is the impact and the potential real kind of benefits of dyslexia. And a lot of these, I guess people would term them conditions, but I would call them probably sort of mindsets, affirmations and abilities, because there is a lot of positivity around this topic as we're going to explore with Julian. But before we get there, Julian and I were just chatting prior to this about kind of the state of the nation, the state of society. I mean, we didn't kind of go into anything sort of hugely strategic or philosophical, but we were just saying how tired everybody seems to be. And I was saying to Julian that, kind of at the end of this week, and I'm feeling really tired in a kind of slightly unusual way, not in a way that I would normally probably expect to be, because the ends of weeks, typically for me, because I produce a lot of content, tend to be fueled by things that I enjoy. But Julian, you've found that a lot of people have been telling you that they're tired right now. What's going on? What is happening out here?
It's literally everyone, and I do mean that. That's not an exaggeration. That I've talked to over the last 2 weeks has said that they are feeling tired, exhausted, drained, any variation on those terms. And I think the general assumption is it's been a long week, fortnight, month, year, decade since 2020. And I think they're all just slowly running on fumes.
It does really feel like that, doesn't it? And one of the things that we began to explore, and then we decided actually, we should do this as part of the podcast and not just keep it to ourselves, was this kind of whole idea of change. And it feels to me that some people are very much kind of fueled by change, just innately. It is part of their makeup, part of the way that they're kind of built, and they kind of feel that it's a real positive, and they would embrace change. Whereas for other people, change is a real threat. It feels like it's something to be feared, and I'm not judging. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I think that there is a certain difference here, isn't there? And I think maybe when you say about kind of running on fumes and feeling kind of really sort of drained by all of this, I mean, do you think what we're seeing here is this kind of impact of change? Because we've all had to, haven't we, since pandemic, since being sort of seeing the first signs of a new recession coming. There's a lot of stuff going on, isn't there, that's kind of beyond our control, I guess, for many of us.
Well, different people, and I've seen and experienced this myself, are have different attitudes to different forms of change. So if it's something in how we change and how we're doing something, then generally we're resistant to it because we've always done something one way. So if we're now suddenly being forced to change that, then that panics us because now we've got to try something new. We've got the possible chance of therefore screwing up the new way of doing things, which we're fearful of. Some people cling to familiar surroundings as a sort of way of remaining calm, staying grounded. And if those change, then we're thrown off kilter and we can't be grounded because we're no longer quite in a familiar area. And sometimes generally just seeing things change around you, even if it's not affecting you in any way, can cause worry or stress. So if it's just something in the news that seems things changing, even if you don't see any direct results of it, you can still feel quite stressed. And that's individually, which one of those or any combination of those that affects us the most is quite different. I know for myself, it's how I do things and surroundings that seriously stresses me out, especially on how I do things. That links back into dyslexia, which I'm sure we'll get onto later.
Mm. It is, and it's quite fascinating, isn't it, really? And I think this whole idea of being in a normal situation or a normal kind of workplace or a normal kind of as you say, kind of sort of macro society, really. I guess for many of us, that word normal kind of doesn't really figure anymore because we're having to adapt. We're having to be, I guess, what you're identifying there is actually quite mindful and present over these things that we can control, things that are within our sort of circle of influence, if you call it that. But I guess there's a lot of, or are a lot of people that you're encountering because of the kind of service that you're offering here, and we'll come to this in just a moment, who are, I guess, kind of searching, are they, for kind of this sort of stability in this word normal? I mean, do you find that people who you're encountering and supporting, do you find they're almost sort of craving normality as the way that we would have defined it before? Because it's a kind of safety net?
Well, within the way I'm dealing with people, the way I support them and help them is they've normally come to me or they've been recommended to me or referred to me that they need to change in how they're doing things because at the moment their version of normal is how they're working and it's not working for them. So their current idea of normal is stress not working for them and they're struggling. So they're looking for change from me, would be a way of putting it. They're looking for me to come in and say, don't do this, do this, and then tell them why. And a lot of people who I know have done similar work as me don't then always say why. And if you don't know why something's changing, that makes it scarier and makes you less likely to want to change. So if you see
That's
everything
interesting.
changing, if you see everything changing around you, but you don't know why it's changing, it makes it unknown. And as more than enough books, movies, and other stories can tell you, we generally fear the unknown. It's just how human nature.
Yeah, that's quite fascinating because I guess what we've already done here is we've kind of hooked into something that I'm sure for a lot of us is a quite an easy to recognize theme within us, and I guess you talk about movies there. I mean, for some people, the unknown of how a particular script or how a particular movie is going to play out is exciting, and for people like that, that is almost possibly why they're drawn to a certain genre of film. It might be, I don't know, a horror movie or something where you're kind of sort of sat there on the edge of your seat just waiting. It's kind of known because you've seen movies like this before, so you kind of know how it's going to play out. But it is that, when is it going to happen? What is that point in time where the scary or the baddie or the monster is going to suddenly turn up? You don't quite know, so therefore you're kept at that kind of level of anticipation. But it's quite a positive thing because you're excited by it in a kind of excitable way. But I guess for people who don't enjoy those kinds of movies and would much rather watch, maybe, I don't know, period drama where you're seeing a story unfold maybe more gradually, there's a feeling maybe of a little bit more sort of sense of calm because there is less uncertainty. You kind of know how things are going to play out. You might have already read the book, so therefore you've seen the script and you kind of know, and so you can kind of enjoy maybe the ambience and some of the more subtle and softer things. Is this kind of where we're going with this? Is this kind of uncertainty thing one of those key components? And we'll come on to, obviously, onto dyslexia in a moment. But I think for a lot of people who, are feeling kind of, the energies of the world right now and kind of reacting maybe in not such a positive way, do you think uncertainty is right at the core of this?
Uncertainty and unknowns, I'd say, would be the two main ones. Sort of either you don't know what's going on at all, so everything's unknown and you're not sure, which means you're uncertain about things, or having things that are you do slightly know, but you don't quite know how things are going to go with them. So more of an uncertainty. So you have knowns, but you're not sure how they're going to go, or you have unknowns, so you've absolutely no idea at all. And I'm sure anyone listening can think of a few examples off the top of their head of sort of going, well, ever since whenever ever things have been starting to go this way, and I don't know how they're going to change. During lockdown, we had no idea how things were going to go or what was going to happen. After the first one, we sort of knew how things were going to go. We never knew when or exactly how things were going to happen, knew roughly. And both of those are all completely different kinds of stress, as we've all been through quite the roller coaster of the last few years.
Mm.
And that
Yeah.
wears you down.
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you think about the second of the lockdowns here in the UK, it did feel more manageable, didn't it? I think we probably saw less people feeling they're kind of almost out of control and feeling kind of literally locked down and restricted by the second one because they'd already experienced the first one. So there was this air of kind of predictability. You either enjoyed it because it gave you the space to go for a walk around the park or whatever, or walk around the garden if we were allowed to, for your little piece of exercise. But in the second one, you knew that there was an end in sight. You knew that you could probably cope with it because you'd created strategies from the first one. So I guess for lots of people in that second lockdown that we had, it was more controllable, it was more manageable, and so you could almost ease into it knowing that there was a bit of a plan. So when you're talking to people, is it that they're kind of creating or looking to create some kind of plan or strategy to be able to take the control? What is their first step? Or as they arrive at your door kind of saying, Julian, help me, or having been referred to you, it's like, Julian, what do you do? What do you offer? Is it that need for a plan that they've already identified, or is that kind of a first sort of stage for them, do you feel?
Many of them probably have absolutely no idea what's coming. So they're referred to me, they know my title, they know my name, they know nothing more. And that's how it normally is when you're referred to someone in my position. You don't really know what's going to happen. Some of them may have dealt with, say, school learning support style, so they may have an idea what they think is going to happen, but they don't really know because I work for a college rather than, say, sixth form. So now suddenly I've got more potential seniority to them. They don't know how old I am. They don't know what I look like. They've absolutely no concept of what's going to happen. So they could be thinking, oh, well, I've had this, and this is a quote we've used a few times in the office for some other things I've done. I may have this middle-aged, middle-class, well, they're not a white woman, but they're still sort of vaguely average person who's patronizing, doesn't really know what they're doing, but at least they do mean well. Or they may have had some specialist help in the past and they've no idea how I'm going to match up to that. They don't. It's quite a dichotomy. I get a very large range of people, from people who just are struggling and need some advice to people who've just had or have had a while ago diagnoses for various forms of neurodiversity and would like to know if there's anything we can do to help. So it's quite a mix. It's quite a range. Most of them don't know what's going to happen. So yeah, there's some uncertainty in there. Plans less so, because you're so most of them are generally unnerved or unsure enough. They don't think far enough ahead of what's coming or what I'm going to give them to do. So they're more just curious, I suppose.
So describe the role then. So what is your title? What do you, I mean, before kind of going into the kind of like what would be a typical day and a typical kind of set of conversations, let's take a few steps back and kind of describe to us really what the role is from your perspective, and kind of how did you find your way into this role?
So I've got sort of two titles, one of which we use more externally, one's more internal because it's less scary. So my official title, at least on the top of my job description, is Learning Styles Researcher, because when I was first brought on, and I'll get into that in a sec, I was looking into new ways of how we could help our students. There was no real thought of me interacting with the students. I'd help produce the material for the students and the tutors and a few other things. We didn't really think much beyond that. So I was just there to research and to give advice. Then I'm now more the learning styles advisor because I now actually do interact quite a lot with the students who do need help, monthly meetings with those who are being noticed. So I'm a lot more in depth. But it's being told you're being referred to a researcher is probably a bit scary. So I'm the learning styles advisor to our students, and that's fair enough. I'm not officially a researcher. That's just the role I'm in. I got the role because of my passion about my own dyslexia. So yes, I'm dyslexic. Exit. No, I can actually read quite well. I just struggle to write, and I'll explain that later. So it was going back to lockdown. It was first year of lockdown. I was the year that we lost our A levels. I'd given up on university near the end of the year because I couldn't cope with the online learning. I ended up running into Kieran, the CEO, on the way down to pick up my stuff from my university. We got into a chat. I ended up, well, I call it a speech. It was more of a rant about how people generally treat dyslexics. And Kieran is one of those sort of people who very much likes change and moving forwards. That was a Friday. My first day at work, because she thought she could use this to at least have a look at what we had for materials to see if they were accessible, was the next Wednesday. 5 days. And neither of us are expecting to give anyone a job or get a job. And my role has grown from simply poking around the learning zone and giving my honest and unbiased and no preconception feedback to basically I call the head, but I am the learning support department. That's most of the story.
Interesting. And it started with a rant. That sounds interesting. I want to go there. What was the rant? What was it? What was it you felt so passionately about?
So I was diagnosed properly with my dyslexia at about 16. It was a post-16 diagnosis. I sort of knew pretty much before that, but didn't have any real knowledge. But I was just about starting to realize the general stigma that the title gives you. So people do look down on you. Sort of, there's an immediate impression, oh, they can't read, they can't write, they must be stupid. That's a load of bollocks. I can tell you that now. I can read very well, which meant that most people wouldn't believe my diagnosis. That's because I read in a very different way. I have to sight read, so I'm reading by visually identifying words rather than sounding them out with phonics. I do very much struggle to write. My handwriting is bad enough; it could probably count as dyslexic. So I don't have a formal diagnosis of that. It looks like a train wreck made of letters. I can't read it. So there's quite a mix of things there, and I just started to realize how different I was seeming to some people from those perspectives. I've been in top set maths, bottom set English for most of my entire life. That sheer dichotomy does give you some weird feelings over most of things. And all of that sort of bubbles over after dealing with other people who didn't have any knowledge. I didn't have much knowledge at the time either of what the name entitled meant. And there's probably about 5 minutes I was talking straight about how generally people think and act based on the title. And yeah, here I am.
It's an interesting one. I'll come on to the numbers and the letters thing in a minute, because I think there's a very interesting thing for people listening to kind of really understand the difference there between the two. Just coming on to this difference between reading and writing, I guess for me, the whole thing, because I've been fascinated forever about just the word communication, how we communicate. And I guess, reading is this kind of inbound communication into the human being. Writing is one form of expression. You're eloquent when it comes to talking. So for somebody who doesn't know a huge amount about dyslexia, but is very open to kind of learn more, where is this thing and again, hopefully not getting too scientific because you'll lose me and possibly many others, but where is this kind of challenge, where is this kind of issue between being eloquent as a speaker of the words, and the way that you kind of form sentences and stuff, it is eloquent, and I'll use that word because you're very, very clear as you talk.
Thank you.
But then the translation into kind of the handwriting, so the physical translation, using your physical body to put things down onto paper, is then for you very, very different. Kind of what's happening there?
So dyslexics are, I suppose you could say that by nature our brains are wired differently. It's a lot more complex than that. If you want, I can give you a better version later, but let's go with the simple version of our brains are simply wired differently, and they are. So instead of being more logical, more written, and with the skills that you would normally use for primarily written English or language and maths, we are more designed around visuals. So we are visual thinkers. We are visual ways of doing things. We often even think in pictures. So whenever you sort of read a book and you've got people's thoughts, and so they're thinking something, it's written down as if it was speech. Quite a few of us don't have that. So that's not just a us trait, but it's more likely to be in us. That we actually do just see things literally in our minds. So because of all this, we're very good with looking at big pictures, looking at three-dimensional objects. When we come to looking at, say, a word, Now, if you're already predisposed to look at everything from multiple angles, up, down, left, right, all over, you try and apply that to a word, you now have just the word cat. So you've got 3 letters, C-A-T. If you look at that in every possible combination, and I have seen this written out as an example, there are 40 possible combinations, upside down, left to right, back to front, etc. And you do all of that processing and you still have no more concept of what on earth these 3 weird symbols mean. And it's that effect that makes us struggle more with reading and writing, because we're trying to process something in 2 dimensions when we try and see everything in 3 dimensions. Eventually we'll learn, yeah, but it's a real struggle because we're doing far more calculations mentally than we need to. And it's literally 3 times as much physical energy, 3 to 5 times as much physical energy for us to do the same task. And that's why we struggle there. But if you meet someone who is incredibly good with their hands, so that they can build something without even referring to a manual, possibly dyslexic, sort of the typical idea of a plumber that can fix everything without actually having to refer to manual, that's possibly one of us. Or you mentioned the eloquency. Do you know the old stereotype of a used car salesman that can sell you anything? Yeah, that's based off one of us. Those are the 2 areas we generally go to if we drop out of academics, because those are where our natural skills are more likely to lie, because that's what we're, I suppose, I wouldn't say pre-programmed, but pre-wired to be better at. So it sort of takes skills out of one area by nature and add them more likely to be found in another area. So we end up with, if you look at our GCSE profiles, the spiky profile, where we literally sort of look like a zigzag shape between which subjects we're good at and which subjects we're not. And yes, I've graphed mine. They do look like that.
Yeah, so there's this. I love the word that you described there, which, for me, again, I saw this picture in my head of this as you were talking this through. So maybe there's a sign there somewhere. But it's the word that you used was symbolism. So when you're seeing these kind of shapes and marks on a page, and as you say, I mean, that's just fascinating about the word cat. And I think for me, there's a lot of clarity now in terms of kind of really understanding that different wiring, because I see CAT, I just get it. I know what that is. I know what it's describing. I don't need to see anything more than just seeing it. And in fact, I know there's a lot of studies which say actually, if I take the middle vowel out and you just see C something T, you can read it as cat. So I think, I guess for somebody who is dyslexic, that would be hugely challenging because of the kind of the real abstract nature of these kind of marks and squiggles and everything. So until you actually see, and again, coming back to this word symbolism, until you actually see the translation of those marks and squiggles into an actual meaning in 3D, it's just nothing. It's just random.
It's image association. You're having to associate the image of a word with its meaning. So actually, once you've learnt it, cutting out the middle letter, that's fine. We're looking at the shape of the word, not the actual contents. So as long as you've got the outline of the word roughly, then we'll probably, and we know what the word is, we'll associate it with its meaning, and that'll be that. But it's learning that in the first place that's hard.
So when we talked earlier about getting tired, this feels exhausting. If you're having to do that, even processing just a very, very simple, set of words, or maybe, I mean, at the worst case, I guess, a very, very large amount of reading in a textbook, to come back to the college example, I mean, that must be the most draining thing of anything.
Oh, yeah, it is. Whether it's harder on the reading or the writing side depends on the individual, but it is, as I said, it's 3 to 5 as much energy as anyone else. It can take us a lot longer, just simply because it's a lot more effort to do so. And the fact it takes us a lot longer means we're now more exhausted regardless of anything else. And it's quite draining just seeing yourself take up to 4 times. I've encountered some that do take 4 times as long to read through, say, part of the textbook as per standard, if there is such a thing. So it just that effect in and of itself, not even the physical effort requirement, makes it draining, sort of knowing that you're so far behind people who have no obvious reason why they should be doing better than you. And especially if you're undiagnosed.
So, I mean, one thing...
sorry. Especially if you're undiagnosed or don't know much about your diagnosis, you still have a dichotomy of, why am I doing worse? And that, again,
Mm.
is mentally draining beyond anything else, and it makes things take so much longer.
One thing I wanted to explore with you was the difference, if there is a difference, and I don't know the answer to this. So I'm going to be very much led by you. This difference between the words and the numbers. So you said having a strength and innate ability in mathematics, whereas the whole kind of reading and writing, particularly on one side, is more of a challenge. With some people, is it both? With others, is it just the numerology and then they're fine with the words, or is it just a complete mix here of things?
Okay, so there's two areas to cover there. One is you have the various dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysnumera, any of the other, all the dys words that roughly seem to mean something similar but with different symptoms. I will summarize all of those by saying those are all the same thing. They are all caused by the same thing. Not everyone, even the professionals, necessarily agree on that or know that, but they are. They're just a nice, easy box of saying most of your symptoms fall under here, so it's easy to categorize you, so we can better help you officially, or so people can better know roughly what your symptoms are. So we can pick and we don't pick and choose, but some by nature we have picked and choose various different symptoms from all of those categories. So for some of us, both are a struggle with English and maths. For some, it's just one. For some, it might almost be neither. I mentioned thinking pictures when it comes to maths, we will sometimes be easier with the simple maths, and we will be far ahead in places if we have mathematical skill. We'll struggle when the maths questions suddenly are half English. So when you have the word subtract in there, what the hell does the word subtract mean? It's a weird word. So of course we're going to struggle with that. But so the human eye can see about 25 frames per second if you know cameras, which I personally don't. So our brains, when we're thinking pictures, can think in about, I think it's 35, 40 frames per second. So anything we process that way goes straight past the conscious mind into the subconscious. So when we're doing maths, we will look at the question, write out the answer, and we won't be able to tell you how we got from A to B, which gets you in a lot of trouble because you don't actually know your own working out. And most of maths, especially when you're learning it, is the working out. So because we process things so fast, we don't know how we got there. We don't know how to edit how we got there if we got it wrong, which is the struggle to then re-educate ourselves as we go. We get into a lot of trouble with our maths teachers. I am very guilty of that. I will not deny that. And it means that later on, when you've got the multi-step complex things that you can't do in your head, we then struggle because we have no easy basis for a lot of the working out. And I have an A level in maths, and I was seriously struggling by the end of that because I couldn't do the working out as often, and it was difficult. I had to start trying to learn, and it was a struggle.
This is a big opportunity, isn't it, for, I guess, all of us to be very mindful over difference. I mean, this is such a great reminder to all of us that, if we're going to view the world and other people just purely through our own eyes and our own perspective and with our own baggage and through our own lenses, we're going to miss a lot of the wonder really of how other people are doing it. Because as soon as you know that somebody is processing what you're seeing in a totally, fundamentally different way, and as you say, almost like with the mathematics, just kind of jumping to the answer because you just know that is kind of the answer and that's where it's gone without knowing necessarily the process. What a thing of beauty. There's something really wondrous in that, if that is not the way that you do it. And so I just think there's so much opportunity in here for really kind of just taking a moment to kind of appreciate the difference that something like dyslexia or dyscalculia or dyspraxia kind of brings to the world. Because if we were all processing it in almost a robotic, systematic way, that everything and everybody was the same, how dull would that be? Whereas actually, if you can just for a minute appreciate, just because somebody will share this and you were very open and said, I have dyslexia right at the start, and that was almost like a a proud statement, if that was almost a permitted or encouraged thing or a celebrated thing, what a lovely thing for somebody who isn't to be able to say, okay, so how are you seeing this? How are you doing? To get to know somebody at a fundamental level of how they process, not just that surface kind of communication. I mean, it really is. I know we're talking here about embracing dyslexia, but I've got it now. I think, I just understood kind of why this is so important. So why do you think it is people don't do this?
Well, actually, the fun parts of that most people were quite shocked by was I realised when I was still sort of researching dyslexia before I started producing material for the college, the hardest part for me was actually learning to think like a non-dyslexic. It's not like we start as a baseline with everyone else and then change into being dyslexic. We have our own perspective from the start. We don't actually know what the normal, in quotes, way of thinking is. So it actually was quite a challenge to realize where I'm actually different and where the rest of us are quite different. And the only thing consistent amongst dyslexics or anyone else with a neurodiversity tag is our inconsistency. So while I am quite eloquent, and while I struggle with writing, I'm mostly okay with reading, as long as I at least know the words and it's in English. And then there are plenty of others with exactly the same diagnosis as me that are very different just on the symptoms or situation. So it's quite a large area of how we think of things. So the second someone can understand one of us, they might not understand another as easily. And we don't understand that we are even different in the first place, or why on earth everyone else is so strange. So it's a simple lack of being able to understand just how different someone standing next to you can be. If you've had exactly the same upbringing, then just because your brain's slightly different, you won't think about that because it's not obvious.
So coming on to those differences then, and kind of how somebody, if they have been diagnosed, or if actually as part of maybe change, or doing some study, which is obviously what we're talking about in this case, or maybe a new role where you're kind of doing tasks, or maybe interacting with people in a way that is different to what you've been used to, and suddenly you start to maybe notice these little clues that are saying, I'm just seem to be acting, behaving, thinking, producing in a slightly different way to those around me. And now I'm starting to get curious, like you say, because I didn't notice it before, or I maybe had clues before, but now it's becoming really exaggerated because of what I'm being tasked with doing, both either professionally or personally. When we start to kind of see that emerge, and maybe somebody then thinks, actually, maybe I am, and I just didn't realize it before. And I guess this can happen at any stage in life. It doesn't just happen to be, when you're in childhood. I guess it could come very late in life that you suddenly have this awakening where, because of the world around you, you've realized, actually, I am a little bit different to some of the people around me. To some I can identify with, and I'm very much like them, but to these others, yeah, I'm just getting this sense of real kind of personal perspective, which is different. When you sort of described earlier about some of the real key strengths are these abilities to see strategically, maybe to be able to see things kind of pictorially or very visually. Is that something then that, in terms of the expression for somebody who has dyslexia, will be a real strength to be able to bring to those around them? And I'm thinking particularly in sort of planning situations when, maybe a business is given this real challenge, and a lot of businesses are going through chaos right now. A lot of teams are really kind of trying to figure out their role and their purpose and the value they bring. Would having somebody who is dyslexic on the team be a huge value? Because it certainly sounds like it to me, because it gives this different perspective, but also maybe the kind of the visual way of describing things, maybe the pictorial storytelling, maybe the big blank sort of sheet of paper on the wall that you're trying to fill in with drawings and stuff, is a more effective way of bonding people together rather than just making lists and talking. Sounds like there's a real opportunity here.
There are actually a few companies that deliberately hire dyslexics, or have been found to have had far more dyslexics than you'd expect. For the visual thinking, NASA, because who better to visualize how a rocket's going to get up into space and how it's going to act up there than someone who can think visually? So they did some testing a while ago, and it was actually the vast majority of the rocket scientists there were dyslexic. GCHQ and other British Secret Services, so they obviously don't talk about it too much, do actively hire dyslexics for the holistic thinking, so the problem solving, and be able to pull various facts and knowledge from various areas and bring it together into a whole. So there are some places that actively recruit. There are other places that find certain people invaluable because, yes, we do have a complete different perspective on things. If you come at something from one thing, we'll come at it from a right angle. And that's not because we try, that's because by nature. There are, however, you're not necessarily going to find a dyslexic in those roles because they may already be too nervous to either admit that they're different or they will be hiding their differences. It's not all wondrous, I'm afraid, at the moment.
So what can we do about this? I mean, obviously you provide a service that, is there supporting and helping to guide and, facilitate people, feeling more accepting if they've just suddenly uncovered it, or if they already knew, but, they need to kind of integrate into a new team or into a new course or something like that. The kinds of support that you offer obviously is very inclusive, it's very collaborative and very supportive. What can the rest of us kind of do about this then? Because it feels like it's still slightly, and I'll use the word taboo. Am I right in thinking that? Does it still kind of feel like that as a dyslexic?
I'm definitely in the minority with how open and accepting I am of what it is, because I see the strengths and angst for myself, which aren't going to be the same strength for everyone else. So I know where my strengths and weaknesses are. I know what it caused. And it's frankly just easier for me to be open with it than anything else. So that's how I am. But I spent 6 solid months doing research into my own personal nature, basically for the college at the beginning of my work. And that's 6 more months of solid work and research than most people will ever either think to or be able to have the time to do. In general, yes, it is still quite taboo. I had one student I talked to, who was dyslexic, who wasn't going to tell his company until his probation was up, because it had affected him in various job interviews previously, and it was too nervous too scary as a chance to take to admit it before his probation was up, because they could easily just kick him out going, oh, well, clearly you're not competent, because previous companies had thought that. And yes, companies still do. It's quite a dichotomy of where places are with their with how much they accept various things, such as dyslexia and the rest of the neurodiverse spectrum. So, in general, educating oneself in how various neurodiversity people, especially dyslexics, can be. So you have a rough understanding of what the upsides and downsides are, so you know how better to help. Accepting the use of various assistive technology. The last person I talked to actually said they used to use a screen reader, so it takes whatever's on your screen of a laptop and then reads it out to you electronically, so you're not having to actually read it yourself, which saves a lot of time and effort. However, they'd used one in school when they're in junior school, got to senior school and got too self-conscious. I did pretty much the same thing with the dictation software, so I know how they feel. You do just sort of go up, you don't see anyone else using it, or nowhere near as many people, so you become too nervous and self-conscious to continue using something that's very beneficial. So most of my role was actually just giving them permission to go, well, you're now at work, you're an adult, try it again. It clearly worked in the past, see if it worked. Apparently it did. So they're now using the screen reader far easier consistently, and it's helped them a lot.
That's a lovely story to hear, that kind of, taking responsibility and accountability and kind of shouting loud and proud. I mean, it might take, for a lot of people, might take a bit of time based on a lot of the baggage that they're bringing with them. And I totally understand that. We all have, a past which is obviously influencing where we are now, and the way that we anticipate outcomes, and they may not be anything like we're actually going to see, but we've already story told in our minds. And that kind of, you used a word a few moments ago, just the word kind of taking an holistic view, and I thought it was really interesting when you said that. Do you find that there's a real kind of correlation between the dyslexia family. Let's talk of that all, just all the various versions of it. As you said, the brand dyslexia and all its sort of various attributes, and the word intuition. Do you find that dyslexics are more intuitive? That it feels like they're not kind of working from maybe a sort of a static list, but they have this kind of more innate sort of knowing? Because a couple of times you've sort of said things that kind of imply that there is a higher, potentially higher level of intuition going on here. Have you seen that in your research?
I have actually. It's one of the more useful resources I came across had a list of what they called the 37 primary most expressed traits of dyslexia, with a note at the top saying most, on average, dyslexics will have 10 of the following traits. So any 10, complete a combination of which ones. One of those was being seen to just be sort of street smart, very intuitive, or very empathetic. And yes, in some cases we will just sort of suddenly go something like that, and everyone else will go, "Ooh, hang on, we hadn't thought of that, but that sounds really good." However, a lot of that, at least in our cases, we have a different perspective from base. So of course, what we think of is going to be different to everyone else, and we think again in pictures. So a lot of our processing is done subconsciously, so we can't tell you how we got to the solution. So yes, it will seem like intuition. So you could definitely call it intuition. It's sort of the expression of how we think.
Yeah, and I love that, because I think as I'm sort of doing my travels and having these conversations and talking to a lot of people, really kind of diverse sort of population, I'm trying to make it as diverse as possible. And I guess one of the themes that I'm picking up here is that intuition, empathy, kind of self-reflection, but also reflecting on how an individual kind of operates within the world around them, and just being really present. I mean, I've used the word mindful sort of over the last couple of years, and almost made it my mantra to kind of really sort of tag the word mindful onto everything. So mindful this, mindful that. But I guess the underlying kind of theme of this is it's just being present and aware, and it's just being patient, both with other people, with situations, with yourself, and saying, look, actually I might just do this differently, and I might process in a slightly different way, but just hold on, just be patient with me. I will get there. I might do it in a different way, and if it does take me 4 times as long, the answer at the end of it could be actually even more valuable to you than if I just rush an answer. So did you feel that kind of overall then it is just about, again, we've got this phrase that we're talking about here, embracing dyslexia, but is it also, do you think, about being just patient with ourselves and with others, and just giving the time and the appreciation that, difference is a good thing?
Patience is certainly a good start. Accepting differences would therefore be the next step. I think I sort of touched on it a little earlier, but a lot of what I do is actually just giving the students I talk to permission to be different. So the one who stopped using a screen reader when they're in school because they were too self-conscious, I gave them permission to use one. Permission to just work in a different way. Most people will work. This isn't actually just a dyslexic problem, but most people, when they go through school, will learn by reading a textbook or anything else, and then making a whole load of notes, up to the point they may as well be almost rewriting the textbook. I'm sure you've met a few people in various days that have done that. It's incredibly inefficient for most people, and it's just how they've ended up learning, because that's how they thought you were supposed to learn, because that's what they picked up in school. A lot of what I did was, when talking to them, was give them permission to do something that's actually useful for them. So, well, why don't you write your notes in a way you'd actually want to revise from? And I know it sounds incredibly silly, but if you're working in that way, you don't want to change how you're working, because, well, I know this works, however inefficiently, so I don't want to take the chance of screwing up a new way of working. So having someone else who's kind, sort of, sympathetic, and then just seemingly understanding, tell you, well, it's okay if you try something different, try this. And then give them a specific direction to try something new in that may actually sound like it makes sense to them, will give them permission, and they will then run with new ideas. That's just one of the examples, but I've done a few others where it's just been a matter of giving a direction and saying, it's okay, have a go.
This is really kind of just wonderfully simple, and I think we should all be celebrating simple, because I think there's so much complexity in the world, and it is simple, isn't it? It's the accountability, and just the lovely phrase you use there. It's having permission to change. It's having permission to do it your way, and often, like the example you gave earlier, which is that when you try it, you realize actually nobody minded anyway. You could have done this all along, but you just didn't realize, because you were almost seeking the permission from outside. And so you're in obviously this wonderfully valuable role for so many people, and obviously literally changing people's lives as you give your service. You've developed and created a toolkit on this topic, haven't you? Tell us a little bit about that.
So I've actually created 2 toolkits in total. The first one was the result of, I mentioned, working for about 6 months of solid research and work. That was the combination of that was the Dyslexic Toolkit for Students, which was it was a list of various problems that I myself mainly, and others that I knew, had encountered and seriously struggled with because of our dyslexia. And it was a way of sort of listing potential solutions. So it was designed as a dip-in guide of, well, I'm struggling with writing an essay. Oh, look, there's a section on how to write an essay of your essay, even though it's an absolutely horrible thing to do. I don't know why anyone likes those. They still send shivers down my spine if someone tells me I've got to write one. So it's just a dip-in guide for various problems that dyslexics are likely to encounter. Not every single solution on there is going to work for every individual, and not every individual is going to have all of those problems. It's just a hope that some of these help sort of guide. The second one was designed for the tutors of the college, and I should say both of these are freely available on our website. It's for anyone. That includes the tutor one. And it was a series of questions that the tutors had put together going, I've had a certain student who, or how do I help with this? And it was a list of various things to keep in mind and answers to those particular questions. Sort of, I've got a student that needs to write 4,000 words for their assignment, but they've written about less than half of that and say they're done. How do we get them to actually write more? So that was actually quite an interesting one. There's several pages on how to work through a potential solution to that, which seems to work.
This is so helpful. I mean, where do people access this? Because I can imagine people listening to this conversation and thinking, "Oh no, Julian is really whetting my appetite for finding out more." Because either this is me and it's affecting me, or actually, somebody I'm working with, or somebody in my family, or one of my friends, I think would benefit from this. Where can they access these toolkits?
So both of them are on the college website under marketingcollege.com/dyslexia. If you scroll down, there's a brightly coloured box with a download the student toolkit here. There's a slight tab just up and to the right of that. If you click on that and enter in, if you want, a couple of small details, mostly so we know who's looking. You can get the tutor one as well. Both are completely free, and they're just there to help anyone that's interested. And there's no profit, there's no anything else. It's just to help out with anyone, because, well, actually, it's because I got fed up with what was freely available already, was generally unhelpful, incredibly long-winded, and written by non-dyslexics for non-dyslexics, basically. It was inaccessible, rubbish, and didn't give you any information. So
what a great motivation to fix it. This was another rant, wasn't it? It clearly was. This is your output from the rant. Love it.
Most of it's written in a conversational way, so it's not written formally. It's written based on a combination of mine and other people's personal experiences. So it's not like it's scientific, academic forms of how you can solve X, Y, or Z. It's just, I seriously struggle with writing essays. Here's a way around it.
It's as simple as that. And I think one of the things, through this conversation that has really been clear to me is, let's not overcomplicate this. Let's listen, let's be present, let's embrace change, let's embrace difference, let's kind of understand other people's perspectives, but also really begin to understand and open up to our own, and accepting. I think acceptance is clearly a bit of a theme from this conversation here. So thank you so much, Julian, for your eloquent, and I'll use the word again, eloquent kind of wisdom here on this topic, because I think for a lot of people it's been one of those, yeah, I should find out a bit more, but I'm not going to. But for others it's been, yeah, I'm curious, but I don't really know where to look. So now, guys, you do. marketingcollege.com/dyslexia. So brilliant stuff. And thank you so much, Julian, for all the hard kind of work that you've put into this, and particularly around the whole research and support that you're currently giving to everyone coming through the college, because I think, this is such a valuable resource that the college offers. So yeah, thank you very, very much.